My name's Dick Beamer. I'm an old B-52 navigator, 62 combat missions in Vietnam, flown out of this airport, Wabash Airport, since 1896. I mean, 1986. Actually, around 1896, there were hot air balloon ascensions at the 4-H County Fair, which was then held at the city park. The first year, actually, they did that was 1870. They also had hot air balloon launches the summer of 1905 at Lucan's Lake, along with bands and other entertainment on weekends. Here's one of the most interesting stories about Wabash County aviation. This is 1906. This is Boyd Park in Rich Valley. And Boyd Park was in a big amusement center, a big amusement park, and it was located just south of Rich Valley at the Rich Valley Bridge. And that roller coaster was the biggest roller coaster in Indiana at the time. And this guy, Clarence Pulley, was interviewed by the newspaper, and I can't remember when, but it was probably 20 years ago, 50 years ago. And here is a quote from the newspaper article. He said, "I remember boarding an open-sided streetcar in downtown Wabash. There was a at there was a at Boyd Park. There was the first airplane I ever saw. It looked like a Wright brothers plane. It could have been them. They weren't famous yet. It didn't take long for them to get off the ground." And in 1906, the Wright brothers did send out exhibition pilots, and it could have been either the Wright brothers or one of their exhibition pilots. And in 1906, it probably couldn't have been much of anybody else because there weren't any other airplanes in existence. I did check with Dayton Archives and the Smithsonian Archives. They didn't have any record of Wright brothers being in Wabash or any of their exhibition pilots, but then they didn't have many records of their exhibition pilots anyway. So they said, that it could have happened. But anyway, it's intriguing. Now we are talking about 1918 and the first and maybe the only military landing, takeoff in Wabash. 1 mile, they said it was happened 1 mile south of Wabash along the highway and interurban Marion. There was a pasture that was cleared of rocks and mowed. That would probably be near like Builder's Mart. And a Lieutenant Butterball had made 2 or 3 other landings at different towns to encourage people to buy Liberty bonds to help finance World War I. Anyway, he landed here at Wabash. When he did, factory whistles blew and church bells rang, and people came out on the interurban and by car and heard fine speeches and uh, war bonds. And for most of the people, it was the first time they'd even seen an airplane. And the airport lasted for one day. Now we come to my favorite Wabash Airport. This picture is of the Service Motor Truck Company and some of their trucks. And there is one of their trucks down at the Wabash Museum. It's a beautiful old truck. The Service Motor Truck Company made trucks back in the 20s. And their factory was located where General Tire used to be. General Tire just took over their buildings, and they they had an aviation division. They designed and built the first six-passenger slash cargo airplane. And they also built a runway and two big hangars. The runway was along Cass Street, on the west side of Cass Street, and about where AutoZone is now. The, and it was 1918, 1919. They bought 10 Army surplus airplanes, trainers, Jennies, bought them cheap because they were Army surplus. Some of them were brand new, still in the box. They used them for pilot training for delivering truck parts to their truck dealers in the Midwest. And every weekend they had exhibitions that drew big crowds along Cass Street. Um, they Wabash had more aircraft and a better airport than Fort Wayne did at that time. The Service Motor Truck Company sold a lot of trucks to the Army during the war. Then, when the war ended, sales kind of slumped and the company folded. And the runway and the hangars were sold. The hangars became a dance hall and then a sale barn and then burnt down in 1940. The golden age of aviation in Wabash lasted just a short time, maybe 5. The next airport was Reddick Field, and it was a family farm not far from the service motor truck field along Cass Street. The Reddick farm was on the north side of Wabash, and Mr. Reddick had some sons, and they all worked on the machine shop, the Reddick machine shop, and they worked on cars. And the machine shop was downtown, but the farm was on the north side of town. And one of the sons, George, was interested in flying, and he learned how to fly down in Anderson. And he bought an airplane in Anderson and flew back to Wabash and landed in the pasture on their farm and flew out of that farm. And some other people who were interested in flying also kept their airplanes on the farm there. And they built a hangar. And eventually, I think in the mid 20s, it became incorporated in 1928. And I don't exactly know what they mean by incorporated, but I think that meant the city of Wabash bought the property, the field. And the field was located about between Kroger's and Pizza Hut. It was basically an east-west runway. It may have gone all the way from Albert Street to Cass Street, I believe. Anyway, it became our Wabash Airport. I remember as a kid riding by it on my bicycle. Bill Lynch flew out of there. He instructed. He was a mechanic. He did about everything there. And he told a story about two teenage boys coming out to the field with some money in their pocket and asking if they could go for a ride. And he let them hop in the airplane. It took off to the west. And just as they were crossing Cass Street, the engine quit and they plopped down successfully in the sale barn parking lot across the street. And one of the boys said, "Is this all there is to it?" So anyway, that was a pretty nice airport, and it was there until the current airport came along in 1958, and we have a fine airport now on the south side of town. For a town the size of Wabash, it's better than it's really a nice airport. Most air most towns this size have an airport, and this usually just got one runway. We have two runways, and it's just really a nice airport. But it's kind of just ordinary. And airports are pretty well I don't know. They're just kind of standardized, and we kind of like it that way. Things are not. We don't want things to get too exciting. Paul Newman landed here in 1968. He was involved in the presidential campaign that year. Lutheran Lutheran helicopters based here. That is one of our bigger activities. One thing that was pretty exciting and kind of fun was in the 1980s, ultralights came along, and that's when guys started building their own fly and lawn chairs, aluminum tubes and Dacron cloth, snowmobile engines, and wheelbarrow tires. And some guys would design their own, some guys would buy kits and put them together in their garage and teach themselves to fly. The FAA said they're like hang gliders with motors. FAA said as long as they don't weigh over 254 pounds, you didn't have to have a license. And guys were out here having a lot of fun and looked to me like they were having too much fun. And so I got back into flying and flew. And it was kind of like aviation going full circle, going back to the very beginning of aviation. And I had one, and I landed back over at Reading Field, which was kind of like, again, like going full circle. I landed out behind Kroger's in an empty straw field. And so that kind of brings us back to the beginning and brings us to the end of talk about Wabash aviation history.